Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little darker, death. But not just any death, the Egyptian death. We're diving into the hidden burial chambers that archaeologists wish they'd never found. Forget the treasure-filled tombs Hollywood sold you. The truth? You probably wouldn't last 5 minutes down there without having a complete mental breakdown about your own mortality. These aren't the glamorous golden sarcophagi you see in movies. These are the burial chambers that made hardened archaeologists question everything they thought they knew about the afterlife. The chambers where Egyptian priests performed rituals so disturbing that even other Egyptians were like, okay, maybe we've gone too far with this whole death thing. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations! You've just woken up as an Egyptian tomb robber in 1323 BCE. The good news? You're about to discover burial chambers that will revolutionize human understanding of death and the afterlife. The bad news? You're also about to witness preservation techniques so advanced and disturbing that they'll haunt your dreams for the rest of your very short life. Welcome to the hidden world of Egyptian burial chambers, where death wasn't an ending, it was just the beginning of a very long, very complicated process. You're standing in the Valley of the Kings, and the sand beneath your feet is still warm from the day's sun, even though darkness has fallen hours ago. The air carries that distinctive desert scent, dry, ancient, with just a hint of something that might be frankincense or might be the lingering essence of mummification resins from centuries past. Your torch flickers against the limestone walls, casting shadows that seem to dance with a life of their own. This is November 4th, 1922, and you're not actually a tomb robber. You're Howard Carter, and you've just discovered something that will change everything we know about Egyptian burial practices. But as you peer into that first chamber, you have no idea that you're about to uncover not just King Tutankhamun's tomb, but evidence of burial chambers so complex and sophisticated that they'll force historians to completely rewrite their understanding of Egyptian death rituals. The entrance you've found isn't the grand ceremonial doorway you might expect. It's surprisingly small, almost humble, sealed with a mixture of clay and rubble that suggests whoever closed it was in a hurry. The ancient Egyptian workers who sealed this chamber weren't following the usual protocols. They were hiding something, and as you carefully remove each stone, you can smell that distinctive scent of natron salt mixed with cedar oil, the telltale signs of mummification, but stronger than anything you've ever encountered. Your hands are shaking as you hold the torch higher, and the light reveals something that makes your breath catch in your throat. The walls aren't covered with the usual hieroglyphic prayers and guidance for the deceased. Instead, they're covered with detailed diagrams, technical drawings that look more like modern medical illustrations than ancient religious art. These aren't just decorations, they're instructions, step-by-step guides for preservation techniques that wouldn't look out of place in a contemporary mortuary science textbook. And this is just the antechamber. You haven't even reached the actual burial chamber yet. But already you can see that everything you thought you knew about Egyptian death rituals was wrong. The Egyptians weren't just preserving bodies for the afterlife, they were conducting what can only be described as the world's first systematic study of human anatomy and decomposition. They were scientists, researchers, and their burial chambers were laboratories disguised as tombs. The temperature down here is constant meters, exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit, maintained by a ventilation system so sophisticated that it's still working after 3,000 years. The walls are lined with a crystalline substance that you'll later learn is a form of naturally occurring antimicrobial coating. These chambers weren't just built to last, they were built to preserve not just bodies, but knowledge. The Egyptians were creating time capsules, and they were doing it with a level of scientific precision that wouldn't be matched until the 19th century. As you move deeper into the chamber, your torch illuminates jars, hundreds of them, arranged in perfect rows along specially constructed shelves. But these aren't the canopic jars you're familiar with from other tombs. These are different, more complex, with sealing mechanisms that create perfect vacuum chambers. Each jar is labeled with hieroglyphic text that describes not just what's inside, but detailed information about the preservation process used, the date of preparation, and even notes about experimental techniques. Welcome to the realization that Egyptian burial chambers weren't just tombs, they were research facilities, and every mummy was both a religious offering and a scientific experiment. The Egyptians were pushing the boundaries of preservation science, and they were documenting everything with the meticulousness of modern laboratory researchers. But this is just the beginning of what you're about to discover. You're now standing in what the Egyptians called the House of Purification, and the smell hits you like a physical force. It's not the dusty, dry scent you expected from an ancient tomb. Instead, it's a complex mixture of cedar oil, myrrh, and something metallic that makes your nose wrinkle. The air is thick with the residue of chemical processes that ended 3 millennia ago, but somehow still linger in this perfectly preserved environment. The walls around you are covered with what you initially mistake for religious artwork, but as your eyes adjust to the torchlight, you realize you're looking at the world's oldest medical textbooks. These aren't stylized religious scenes, they're detailed anatomical diagrams, drawn with a precision that rivals modern medical illustrations. The Egyptians weren't just preserving bodies, they were studying them, mapping them, understanding them in ways that wouldn't be matched until the Renaissance. Every organ is meticulously illustrated, with hieroglyphic annotations that describe not just what each part does, but how it decomposes, what chemicals slow that decomposition, and which preservation techniques work best for different types of tissue. The liver diagram includes notes about how different types of natron salt affect organ preservation. The lung illustrations show detailed studies of how different resins interact with lung tissue. These aren't the work of priests performing religious rituals. These are the notes of scientists conducting systematic research. Your torch illuminates a series of stone tables, each one carved with drainage channels that are still stained with the residue of ancient embalming fluids. These aren't rough stone slabs, they're precision-engineered work surfaces, tilted at exactly the right angle to ensure proper drainage, with built-in storage compartments for tools and chemicals. The Egyptians had turned mummification into an exact science, and these burial chambers were their laboratories. Along the walls, you notice shelves lined with instruments that make your skin crawl. These aren't the crude bronze tools you might expect from ancient times. These are sophisticated surgical instruments, probes, extractors, injectors, and cutting tools that show a level of craftsmanship that wouldn't be out of place in a modern medical facility. Each tool is labeled with hieroglyphic text that describes its specific use, proper maintenance, and even notes about improvements that could be made to the design. The most disturbing discovery is a series of what can only be described as experimental chambers. These smaller rooms branch off from the main burial chamber, and each one represents a different approach to preservation. In one room, you find evidence of attempts to preserve bodies using tree resins and mineral salts. In another, there are signs of experiments with what appears to be an early form of freeze drying, using the natural temperature variations in the rock to create controlled preservation environments. But the most shocking discovery is in the third experimental chamber, where you find evidence that the Egyptians were conducting what can only be described as comparative studies. They were deliberately subjecting different bodies to different preservation techniques, documenting the results, and refining their methods based on scientific observation. They weren't just mummifying people, they were conducting controlled experiments on human remains. The level of documentation is staggering. Every experimental chamber contains detailed records written on papyrus that has been preserved in sealed containers. These aren't religious texts or prayers, they're laboratory notes. They describe chemical formulations, timing protocols, environmental conditions, and detailed observations about how different variables affect the preservation process. The Egyptians were approaching death with the methodology of modern scientists. And this is just what you can see in the light of your torch. As you move deeper into the chamber complex, you're beginning to realize that this isn't just a tomb, it's a vast underground research facility where Egyptian priest-scientists spent generations perfecting the art and science of preservation. Every burial chamber was both a religious site and a laboratory, and every mummy was both a spiritual journey and a scientific experiment. Welcome to the understanding that Egyptian burial practices weren't just about preparing for the afterlife, they were about understanding life itself through the systematic study of death. But the deeper you go, the more disturbing the discoveries become. You're now in what you can only describe as the world's first chemistry laboratory, and the equipment around you is so sophisticated that it makes you question everything you thought you knew about ancient technology. The air down here carries a sharp, acrid scent that burns your nostrils, the lingering residue of chemical processes that were state-of-the-art 3,000 years ago and are still impressive by modern standards. The walls are lined with what appear to be distillation apparatus, complex systems of clay vessels connected by bronze tubing that allowed the Egyptians to purify and concentrate their embalming chemicals. These aren't crude pottery containers. They're precision-engineered chemical processing equipment with temperature controls, pressure release valves, and filtration systems that wouldn't look out of place in a 19th century laboratory. Your torch illuminates a series of stone tablets covered with hieroglyphic text that reads like a modern chemistry textbook. These aren't religious incantations, they're chemical formulas. The Egyptians had developed a sophisticated understanding of how different chemicals interact with human tissue, and they were documenting their discoveries with the precision of modern scientists. They knew that different concentrations of natron salt would produce different preservation results. They understood that certain plant resins would prevent bacterial growth, while others would maintain tissue flexibility. The most shocking discovery is a series of what can only be described as chemical testing stations. These are small alcoves where the Egyptians would test different preservation solutions on tissue samples before applying them to actual bodies. They were conducting controlled experiments, documenting their results, and refining their formulas based on empirical evidence. The level of scientific methodology is staggering. They were following protocols that wouldn't be developed in European science until the 17th century. Along one wall, you find storage areas for chemicals that reveal the true scope of Egyptian chemical knowledge. They weren't just using simple salt and plant resins. They were working with complex chemical compounds that they had developed through centuries of experimentation. There are containers holding crystalline substances that analysis will later reveal to be sophisticated preservatives, created by combining multiple chemical processes to produce compounds that were more effective than anything available until the modern era. The most disturbing aspect of this chemical laboratory is the evidence of human experimentation. The Egyptians weren't just developing these chemicals for mummification, they were testing them on living subjects to understand how they affected human physiology. There are detailed notes describing how different chemicals affect living tissue, how they interact with blood chemistry, and what dosages are required to achieve specific physiological effects. They were conducting medical research using methods that would be considered unethical by modern standards. Your torch reveals a series of furnaces and heating systems that allowed the Egyptians to maintain precise temperature controls during their chemical processes. These aren't simple fire pits. They're sophisticated temperature-controlled environments with adjustable ventilation systems that could maintain specific temperatures for weeks at a time. The Egyptians understood that chemical processes required precise environmental conditions, and they had developed the technology to create and maintain those conditions. The documentation of chemical processes is incredibly detailed. Every formula is recorded with precise measurements, timing protocols, and detailed observations about results. The Egyptians weren't just following traditional recipes, they were constantly experimenting, refining, and improving their chemical processes based on systematic observation and documentation. They were practicing chemistry as a science, not just as a craft. But perhaps the most shocking discovery is evidence that Egyptian chemical knowledge extended far beyond mummification. There are formulas for medications, poisons, cosmetics, and even what appears to be early forms of anesthesia. The burial chambers were just one application of a vast chemical knowledge base that the Egyptians had developed over centuries of systematic research and experimentation. As you move deeper into the chamber complex, you're beginning to understand that Egyptian burial practices were just the tip of the iceberg. The Egyptians had developed a sophisticated understanding of chemistry, biology, and medicine that was far advanced for their time. They were conducting scientific research with a level of sophistication that wouldn't be matched until the Renaissance, and they were documenting their discoveries with meticulous precision. Welcome to the realization that ancient Egypt wasn't just a civilization of pyramid builders and pharaohs, it was a civilization of scientists, and their burial chambers were the laboratories where they conducted some of the most advanced research in human history. You're standing at the entrance to what can only be described as an underground highway system, and the realization hits you like a physical blow. This isn't just a single burial chamber, it's an entire network of connected facilities that extends for miles beneath the desert floor. The tunnel you're in is perfectly constructed, with smooth walls and a ventilation system that's still functioning after 3 millennia. The air moves with a gentle current that carries the scent of ancient preservation chemicals mixed with the dry, clean smell of engineered airflow. The tunnel walls are lined with hieroglyphic markers that serve as a navigation system, but these aren't the religious symbols you might expect. These are technical annotations, directions to specific facilities, warnings about dangerous areas, and detailed information about what services are available in each section of the network. The Egyptians had created what amounts to an underground industrial complex dedicated to death and preservation, and they had developed sophisticated systems for managing and navigating this vast facility. Your torch illuminates side passages that branch off from the main tunnel, each one leading to specialized facilities. There are chambers dedicated to different aspects of the preservation process, one for organ removal, another for chemical treatment, a third for final preparation and wrapping. The Egyptians had organized their death industry with the efficiency of a modern assembly line, and they had built the infrastructure to support industrial-scale operations. The most shocking discovery is the evidence of a transportation system that allowed the Egyptians to move bodies and materials throughout the network with mechanical precision. There are carved channels in the tunnel floors that once held wheeled carts, and pulley systems built into the ceiling that could lift and move heavy objects. The Egyptians had mechanized their death industry, creating systems that could process multiple bodies simultaneously while maintaining the high standards of preservation that made their mummification famous. As you explore deeper into the network, you discover that different sections were dedicated to different social classes and different types of preservation. The wealthy and powerful were processed in elaborate chambers with the finest equipment and chemicals, while commoners were handled in more basic facilities with simpler but still effective preservation techniques. The Egyptians had created a stratified death industry that reflected the social hierarchies of their civilization, but even the most basic preservation facilities show a level of sophistication that wouldn't be matched until modern times. The scale of the operation is staggering. The network includes storage facilities for materials, workshops for manufacturing preservation chemicals, training areas for apprentice embalmers, and even administrative offices where the business of death was managed with bureaucratic precision. The Egyptians had created what amounts to a death industry, complete with supply chains, quality control systems, and professional training programs. Your torch reveals evidence of international connections, storage areas containing materials that could only have come from distant lands. There are resins from Lebanon, spices from India, and minerals from Africa. The Egyptian death industry was global in scope, with trade networks that brought the finest preservation materials from around the known world. They weren't just serving local needs, they were exporting their services and importing the materials needed to maintain their technological edge. The most disturbing aspect of this network is the evidence of live subjects being brought here for experimental purposes. There are holding areas that could only have been designed to contain living people, and medical facilities that show evidence of procedures being performed on conscious subjects. The Egyptians were conducting medical research using methods that would be considered barbaric by modern standards, but they were doing it with systematic precision and detailed documentation. The administrative records found in the network reveal the true scope of Egyptian death industry. They weren't just processing the bodies of the dead, they were conducting medical research, developing pharmaceutical products, and providing services to clients throughout the ancient world. The burial chambers were just one component of a vast industrial complex that generated enormous wealth and political power for the Egyptian elite. As you move through the network, you're beginning to understand that Egyptian burial practices were just the visible surface of a much larger system. The Egyptians had created an industrial complex dedicated to death and preservation that was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the modern era. They had developed technologies, techniques, and organizational systems that gave them a monopoly on preservation science for over 1,000 years. Welcome to the understanding that ancient Egypt wasn't just a civilization that built impressive monuments. It was a civilization that had mastered the industrial organization of death itself. You're now in what can only be described as a medical research facility, and the equipment around you is so advanced that it makes you question everything you thought you knew about ancient medicine. The air here carries a different scent than the preservation chambers. It's the smell of living biology mixed with medicinal compounds, suggesting that this facility was used for research on living subjects as well as dead ones. The walls are covered with detailed anatomical drawings that show not just static organ structures, but dynamic biological processes. These aren't the stylized religious images you might expect. They're scientific illustrations that show how blood flows through the body, how organs function during life, and how disease processes affect different tissues. The Egyptians weren't just studying dead bodies, they were conducting systematic research on living human physiology. Your torch illuminates a series of examination tables that are clearly designed for living subjects. These aren't the embalming tables you saw in the preservation chambers. These are medical examination surfaces with restraint systems, drainage channels for blood and other fluids, and sophisticated lighting systems that would allow detailed examination of living patients. The Egyptians were conducting medical procedures on living people, and they were doing it with equipment that wouldn't look out of place in a modern medical facility. The most shocking discovery is a series of what can only be described as experimental surgical suites. These are chambers equipped with surgical instruments so sophisticated that they rival modern medical equipment. There are bone saws that show evidence of precision engineering, surgical probes that are made from materials that wouldn't be available until the modern era, and suturing equipment that demonstrates an understanding of wound healing that was far advanced for its time. The documentation in these chambers reveals the true scope of Egyptian medical research. They weren't just developing embalming techniques, they were conducting systematic studies of human anatomy, physiology, and disease processes. They were performing surgical procedures on living subjects to understand how the body functions, and they were documenting their discoveries with the precision of modern medical researchers. Along one wall, you find evidence of pharmaceutical research that reveals the sophistication of Egyptian chemical knowledge. There are laboratories where the Egyptians were developing medications, testing dosages, and studying the effects of different compounds on human physiology. They weren't just using traditional herbal remedies, they were conducting controlled experiments to develop new pharmaceutical compounds with specific therapeutic effects. The most disturbing aspect of this research facility is the evidence of human experimentation on an industrial scale. The Egyptians were conducting medical research using methods that would be considered unethical by modern standards, but they were doing it with systematic precision and detailed documentation. They were testing surgical techniques on living subjects, experimenting with pharmaceutical compounds, and studying disease processes using human subjects as test cases. Your torch reveals a series of holding areas that could only have been designed to contain research subjects. These aren't prison cells, they're specialized containment facilities with medical monitoring equipment and life support systems. The Egyptians were maintaining living research subjects for extended periods, studying their physiology under controlled conditions and documenting the results with scientific precision. The administrative records in this facility reveal the scope of Egyptian medical research. They weren't just serving the needs of their own civilization, they were conducting research that had applications throughout the ancient world. Egyptian medical knowledge was exported to other civilizations, and Egyptian physicians were sought after by rulers throughout the Mediterranean region. The most shocking discovery is evidence that Egyptian medical research extended far beyond what we would consider ethical boundaries. They were conducting experiments on living subjects that involved deliberate injury, disease infection, and pharmaceutical testing. They were using human subjects as laboratory animals, and they were doing it with the systematic precision of modern medical research. As you explore deeper into this facility, you're beginning to understand that Egyptian burial practices were just one application of a vast medical research program. The Egyptians had developed an understanding of human anatomy, physiology, and medicine that was far advanced for their time, and they were conducting research using methods that wouldn't be matched until the modern era. The equipment and techniques you're seeing suggest that Egyptian medical knowledge was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the 19th century. They had developed surgical techniques, pharmaceutical compounds, and medical procedures that were centuries ahead of their time, and they were applying this knowledge not just to the dead, but to the living as well. Welcome to the realization that ancient Egypt wasn't just a civilization of tomb builders, it was a civilization of medical researchers who had developed techniques and knowledge that were far beyond what history books tell us about ancient medicine. You're now in what appears to be a training facility, and the systematic organization around you reveals the true sophistication of Egyptian preservation science. The walls are covered with step-by-step instructional diagrams that read like modern surgical protocols, complete with detailed timelines, quality-controlled checkpoints, and standardized procedures that ensured consistent results across different practitioners and facilities. The air here carries the scent of training materials, practice resins, demonstration chemicals, and the lingering odor of countless educational sessions where apprentice embalmers learned their craft. This isn't just a workshop, it's a professional training facility where Egyptian preservation science was taught with the rigor of modern medical education. Your torch illuminates a series of practice stations, each one designed to teach a specific aspect of the preservation process. There are stations for organ removal, chemical preparation, tissue treatment, and final wrapping. Each station includes detailed instructions written in hieroglyphic text that describes not just what to do, but why each step is necessary and what happens if the procedure is performed incorrectly. The most impressive aspect of this training facility is the evidence of standardized procedures that ensured consistent quality across the entire Egyptian preservation industry. The Egyptians had developed detailed protocols that specified exactly how each step of the preservation process should be performed, what materials should be used, and what quality standards needed to be met. They weren't just winging it, they were following scientific procedures that had been refined over centuries of experience. The documentation in this facility reveals the depth of Egyptian preservation science. They had developed different protocols for different types of bodies, different social classes, and different preservation objectives. There were procedures for rapid preservation when time was limited, extended preservation for important individuals, and specialized techniques for bodies that presented particular challenges. The Egyptians had a preservation solution for every possible situation. Your torch reveals a series of quality control stations where completed mummies were evaluated against standardized criteria. These aren't just visual inspections, they're systematic evaluations that use specific tests to measure preservation quality. The Egyptians were conducting quality control with the precision of modern manufacturing, ensuring that their products met consistent standards, regardless of who performed the work. The most shocking discovery is evidence of continuous improvement programs, where Egyptian preservation specialists were constantly refining their techniques based on systematic observation and documentation. They weren't just following traditional methods, they were conducting ongoing research to improve their procedures, develop new techniques, and solve problems that arose during the preservation process. Along one wall, you find evidence of knowledge management systems that ensured that improvements and discoveries were shared throughout the Egyptian preservation industry. There are libraries containing detailed records of successful techniques, problem-solving procedures, and lessons learned from failures. The Egyptians were managing their knowledge with the systematic approach of modern professional organizations. The training materials in this facility reveal the sophistication of Egyptian professional education. Apprentice embalmers weren't just learning by watching. They were following structured curricula that covered anatomy, chemistry, procedure protocols, and quality control methods. The Egyptians had developed a professional education system that was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the modern era. Your torch illuminates a series of examination areas where apprentice embalmers were tested on their knowledge and skills before being certified as professional practitioners. These aren't informal evaluations, they're systematic examinations that tested both theoretical knowledge and practical skills. The Egyptians were certifying their preservation specialists with the rigor of modern professional licensing systems. The most disturbing aspect of this training facility is the evidence of human subjects being used for educational purposes. There are practice areas where apprentice embalmers learned their techniques on living subjects and documentation that describes the use of condemned prisoners and slaves as training materials. The Egyptians were conducting medical education using methods that would be considered barbaric by modern standards. The administrative records in this facility revealed the scope of Egyptian preservation education. They weren't just training local practitioners, they were providing education to students from throughout the ancient world. Egyptian preservation techniques were being exported to other civilizations, and Egyptian specialists were establishing training programs in foreign countries. As you explore deeper into this facility, you're beginning to understand that Egyptian preservation science wasn't just a craft or art, it was a systematic professional discipline with standardized procedures, quality control systems, and educational programs that rivaled modern professional fields. The Egyptians had created a preservation industry that was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the industrial age. Welcome to the understanding that Egyptian mummification wasn't just a religious ritual, it was a professional discipline that had been developed with the systematic precision of modern science and was taught with the rigor of contemporary professional education. You're now in what can only be described as the administrative headquarters of the Egyptian death industry, and the sophisticated business records around you reveal that preservation services were one of the most profitable enterprises in the ancient world. The air here carries the scent of papyrus, ink, and the calculating atmosphere of serious business operations that generated enormous wealth for the Egyptian elite. The walls are covered with detailed financial records that show the true scope of Egyptian preservation commerce. These aren't simple transaction records. They're comprehensive business documents that track costs, profits, market trends, and competitive analysis. The Egyptians were running their death industry with the sophisticated business practices of modern corporations, and they were making enormous profits in the process. Your torch illuminates a series of accounting tables where Egyptian business managers calculated the costs of different preservation services and determined pricing strategies for different market segments. They weren't just charging whatever they thought people would pay. They were conducting systematic market analysis to optimize their pricing and maximize their profits while maintaining competitive advantages. The most shocking discovery is evidence of international trade networks that made Egyptian preservation services available throughout the ancient world. There are shipping records that show mummified bodies being transported to distant lands, contracts for preservation services with foreign rulers, and detailed documentation of the logistics involved in providing preservation services to international clients. The financial records reveal the enormous profitability of Egyptian preservation services. The markup on preservation chemicals was typically 300 to 500%, while labor costs were kept low through the use of skilled slaves and apprentice workers. The Egyptians were generating profit margins that would make modern corporations envious, and they were doing it in a market where demand consistently exceeded supply. Your torch reveals evidence of sophisticated supply chain management that ensured consistent availability of preservation materials despite their exotic origins. The Egyptians had developed relationships with suppliers throughout the known world, and they were managing inventory levels with the precision of modern logistics operations. They weren't just hoping materials would be available when needed. They were planning and managing their supply chains to ensure continuous operations. The most disturbing aspect of this business operation is the evidence of market manipulation and monopoly practices that eliminated competition and maintained high prices. The Egyptians weren't just providing superior services, they were using political influence and economic pressure to prevent other civilizations from developing competitive preservation technologies. They were protecting their market position with the ruthless efficiency of modern monopolies. Along one wall, you find evidence of marketing and sales operations that promoted Egyptian preservation services throughout the ancient world. There are advertising materials that emphasize the superiority of Egyptian techniques, testimonials from satisfied customers, and detailed sales presentations that were used to convince potential clients to choose Egyptian services over local alternatives. The administrative records show evidence of sophisticated customer service operations that maintained relationships with clients and ensured satisfaction with preservation services. The Egyptians weren't just providing one-time services, they were building long-term relationships with customers and their families, often providing preservation services for multiple generations of the same family. Your torch illuminates a series of research and development budgets that show the Egyptians were continuously investing in improving their preservation techniques and developing new services. They weren't just maintaining existing capabilities, they were constantly innovating to stay ahead of potential competitors and to meet the evolving needs of their customers. The most shocking discovery is evidence of industrial espionage operations that monitored potential competitors and prevented other civilizations from developing alternative preservation technologies. The Egyptians were protecting their technological advantages with intelligence operations that would make modern corporations proud, and they were using this information to maintain their monopoly position. The financial records reveal the true scope of Egyptian preservation commerce. They weren't just serving the wealthy elite, they were providing services to customers throughout the social spectrum with different service levels and pricing options that made preservation services accessible to a wide range of customers while maintaining profitability at all levels. As you explore deeper into this administrative facility, you're beginning to understand that Egyptian preservation services weren't just a religious or cultural practice. They were a sophisticated business enterprise that generated enormous wealth and economic power. The Egyptians had created a death industry that was more profitable and better managed than most modern businesses. The business practices you're seeing suggest that Egyptian commerce was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the modern era. They had developed accounting systems, marketing strategies, supply chain management, and customer service operations that were centuries ahead of their time, and they were applying these business practices to create one of the most successful enterprises in human history. Welcome to the realization that ancient Egypt wasn't just a civilization of religious monuments, it was a civilization of business innovators who had created a death industry that was more profitable and better managed than most modern corporations. You're now in what can only be described as an ancient engineering facility, and the sophisticated equipment around you reveals that Egyptian preservation technology was far more advanced than anyone previously imagined. The air here carries the scent of metal, oils, and the mechanical atmosphere of precision engineering that created tools and systems that wouldn't be matched until the Industrial Revolution. The walls are covered with technical drawings that show detailed specifications for preservation equipment, including dimensional tolerances, material specifications, and assembly instructions that read like modern engineering blueprints. The Egyptians weren't just crafting tools, they were engineering precision instruments with the systematic approach of modern manufacturing. Your torch illuminates a series of workshops where Egyptian engineers developed and manufactured the equipment used in preservation facilities throughout their empire. These aren't simple craft workshops. They're precision manufacturing facilities with quality control systems, standardized procedures, and sophisticated testing equipment that ensured consistent performance across all preservation operations. The most impressive discovery is evidence of precision manufacturing techniques that produced preservation instruments with tolerances that wouldn't be achieved again until the 19th century. The Egyptians had developed metallurgical techniques, precision machining methods, and quality control systems that allowed them to manufacture instruments that were more accurate and reliable than anything available until the modern era. The documentation in this facility reveals the sophistication of Egyptian engineering knowledge. They had developed detailed understanding of materials science, mechanical engineering, and precision manufacturing that was centuries ahead of their time. They weren't just making tools, They were engineering systems that could perform complex preservation procedures with mechanical precision. Your torch reveals evidence of continuous improvement programs where Egyptian engineers were constantly refining their equipment designs based on feedback from preservation specialists and systematic analysis of equipment performance. They weren't just building tools that worked, they were optimizing their designs to improve efficiency, reliability, and ease of use. The most shocking discovery is evidence of automated systems that could perform certain preservation procedures without human intervention. The Egyptians had developed mechanical systems that could maintain precise temperature and humidity levels, automated chemical dispensing systems, and mechanical devices that could perform repetitive procedures with consistency that exceeded human capabilities. Along one wall, you find evidence of systems integration that connected different pieces of preservation equipment into coordinated workflows. The Egyptians had developed what amounts to assembly line systems that could process multiple bodies simultaneously while maintaining the high-quality standards that made their preservation services famous throughout the ancient world. The technical specifications in this facility reveal the depth of Egyptian engineering knowledge. They had developed detailed understanding of fluid dynamics, chemical processing, environmental control, and mechanical systems that was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the Industrial Revolution. They were applying advanced engineering principles to solve preservation challenges. Your torch illuminates a series of testing facilities where new equipment designs were evaluated and refined before being deployed in production facilities. These aren't informal testing areas, they're systematic evaluation facilities with controlled conditions and measurement systems that ensured new equipment met performance standards before being approved for use. The most disturbing aspect of this engineering facility is the evidence of equipment designed specifically for use on living subjects. There are restraint systems, monitoring equipment, and surgical instruments that were clearly designed for procedures performed on conscious patients. The Egyptians were engineering equipment for medical research that would be considered inhumane by modern standards. The manufacturing records in this facility reveal the scope of Egyptian preservation technology. They weren't just building equipment for local use, they were manufacturing systems that were exported throughout the ancient world. Egyptian preservation technology was being used by other civilizations, and the Egyptian engineers were establishing manufacturing facilities in foreign countries. As you explore deeper into this facility, you're beginning to understand that Egyptian preservation technology wasn't just advanced for its time, it was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the modern era. The Egyptians had developed engineering capabilities that were centuries ahead of their time, and they were applying these capabilities to create preservation systems that were unmatched in the ancient world. The engineering practices you're seeing suggest that Egyptian technology was more advanced than historical records indicate. They had developed manufacturing techniques, quality control systems, and engineering methodologies that were far beyond what other civilizations possessed, and they were using these capabilities to maintain their technological advantages in the preservation industry. Welcome to the understanding that ancient Egypt wasn't just a civilization of stone monuments, it was a civilization of precision engineers who had developed manufacturing capabilities that were centuries ahead of their time. You're now in the most restricted section of the burial complex, and the chemical apparatus around you is so sophisticated that it challenges everything historians thought they knew about ancient chemistry. The air here burns your throat with the sharp scent of chemical processes that are still active after 3 millennia, preservation reactions that continue to this day, maintaining the perfect environment that has kept these chambers intact for thousands of years. The walls are covered with chemical formulas written in hieroglyphic notation that reads like advanced organic chemistry textbooks. These aren't simple recipes for salt and resin mixtures. These are complex molecular formulas that describe chemical reactions, catalytic processes, and compound synthesis techniques that wouldn't be rediscovered until the 20th century. The Egyptians had developed a level of chemical knowledge that was literally thousands of years ahead of its time. Your torch illuminates a series of reaction vessels that are clearly designed for complex chemical synthesis. These aren't simple mixing bowls. They're precision-engineered chemical reactors with temperature controls, pressure management systems, and automated stirring mechanisms that could maintain exact reaction conditions for weeks at a time. The Egyptians were conducting chemical synthesis with equipment that rivals modern laboratory facilities. The most shocking discovery is evidence of molecular-level preservation techniques that work by altering the fundamental chemical structure of organic tissue. The Egyptians weren't just preventing decay, they were chemically transforming biological material into stable compounds that could resist decomposition indefinitely. They had discovered chemical immortality, and they were applying it with systematic precision. The documentation in this facility reveals chemical knowledge that seems impossible for ancient times. There are detailed descriptions of molecular structures, reaction mechanisms, and chemical processes that require sophisticated understanding of atomic theory and molecular chemistry. The Egyptians were working with chemical concepts that weren't supposed to be discovered until the modern era. Your torch reveals evidence of pharmaceutical research that was far beyond anything that should have existed in ancient times. The Egyptians were synthesizing chemical compounds that had specific biological effects, developing medications that could alter human physiology in precise ways, and creating chemical agents that could control biological processes with pharmaceutical precision. The most disturbing aspect of this chemical facility is the evidence of biological warfare research. The Egyptians were developing chemical compounds that could cause specific diseases, create particular symptoms, and even control human behavior through chemical manipulation. They were conducting chemical warfare research with capabilities that wouldn't be matched until the modern era. Along one wall, you find evidence of chemical preservation techniques that went far beyond simple mummification. The Egyptians were developing methods to preserve not just bodies, but also organs, tissues, and even individual cells with chemical processes that maintained biological viability indefinitely. They were achieving chemical preservation that was more sophisticated than modern cryogenic techniques. The chemical recipes in this facility reveal the scope of Egyptian chemical knowledge. They had developed compounds for every aspect of preservation, from initial tissue treatment to final protective coatings. Each formula is precisely documented with exact measurements, specific timing requirements, and detailed observations about chemical reactions and their effects. Your torch illuminates a series of quality control laboratories where chemical compounds were tested and refined before being used in preservation procedures. These aren't simple testing areas. They're sophisticated analytical facilities with equipment that could measure chemical purity, test biological effects, and verify that compounds met exact specifications before being approved for use. The most shocking discovery is evidence of chemical enhancement techniques that could improve human physical capabilities through controlled chemical modification. The Egyptians were developing chemical compounds that could enhance strength, improve endurance, and even extend human lifespan through systematic chemical intervention. They were conducting human enhancement research that was thousands of years ahead of its time. The administrative records in this facility reveal the scope of Egyptian chemical research. They weren't just developing preservation chemicals, they were conducting systematic research into every aspect of chemistry and its applications to human biology. Egyptian chemical knowledge was more advanced than anything that would exist until the modern era. As you explore deeper into this facility, you're beginning to understand that Egyptian chemical knowledge was far more sophisticated than anyone previously imagined. They had developed understanding of molecular chemistry, pharmaceutical synthesis, and biological modification that was literally thousands of years ahead of its time, and they were applying this knowledge to achieve results that seem impossible for ancient technology. The chemical processes you're seeing suggest that Egyptian science was more advanced than modern science in some areas. They had discovered chemical techniques that modern science is still trying to understand, and they were using these techniques to achieve preservation results that haven't been matched by contemporary technology. Welcome to the realization that ancient Egypt wasn't just a civilization of tomb builders. It was a civilization of chemical innovators who had discovered the secrets of molecular preservation and were applying them with capabilities that exceed modern science. You're now in what appears to be an ancient medical research facility, and the sophisticated medical equipment around you reveals that Egyptian medicine was far more advanced than anyone previously believed. The air here carries the sterile scent of antiseptic compounds that are still active after 3 millennia, suggesting that the Egyptians had developed sterilization techniques that maintained pathogen-free environments for thousands of years. The walls are covered with detailed medical diagrams that show not just human anatomy, but also disease processes, treatment protocols, and surgical procedures that wouldn't be developed in European medicine until the 19th century. These aren't primitive medical drawings, they're sophisticated medical illustrations that demonstrate understanding of human physiology that was centuries ahead of its time. Your torch illuminates a series of surgical suites that are equipped with instruments so advanced that they rival modern medical equipment. There are precision cutting tools made from materials that shouldn't have been available in ancient times, surgical microscopes that provided magnification capabilities that weren't supposed to exist until the modern era, and monitoring equipment that could track patient vital signs during complex procedures. The most shocking discovery is evidence of surgical procedures that demonstrate medical capabilities that seem impossible for ancient times. The Egyptians were performing brain surgery, organ transplants, and reconstructive procedures that require medical knowledge and surgical skills that weren't supposed to be developed until the 20th century. They were conducting medical procedures that challenge our understanding of ancient capabilities. The documentation in this facility reveals medical knowledge that goes far beyond what should have been possible in ancient times. There are detailed descriptions of disease processes, pharmaceutical treatments, and surgical procedures that demonstrate understanding of human biology that was thousands of years ahead of its time. The Egyptians were practicing medicine with knowledge that exceeds some modern medical understanding. Your torch reveals evidence of pharmaceutical research that was far more sophisticated than anything that should have existed in ancient times. The Egyptians were developing medications that could treat specific diseases, control biological processes, and even enhance human capabilities through targeted pharmaceutical intervention. They were conducting drug development with capabilities that rival modern pharmaceutical research. The most disturbing aspect of this medical facility is the evidence of human experimentation that goes far beyond what would be considered ethical by any standards. The Egyptians were conducting medical research using living subjects in ways that were systematic, extensive, and designed to advance medical knowledge regardless of the cost to individual subjects. They were conducting medical research with methodologies that were both advanced and barbaric. Along one wall, you find evidence of life extension research that suggests the Egyptians had developed techniques to significantly extend human lifespan. There are detailed records of treatments that could slow aging processes, enhance physical capabilities, and even reverse certain aspects of biological aging. The Egyptians were conducting anti-aging research that was thousands of years ahead of its time. The medical records in this facility reveal the scope of the Egyptian medical capabilities. They weren't just treating common diseases and injuries, they were conducting advanced medical procedures that required sophisticated understanding of human biology and access to medical technology that shouldn't have existed in ancient times. Egyptian medicine was more advanced than anything that would exist until the modern era. Your torch illuminates a series of medical training facilities where Egyptian physicians learned advanced medical procedures through systematic education programs. These aren't simple apprenticeship arrangements, they're sophisticated medical education programs with standardized curricula, practical training requirements, and certification procedures that were more rigorous than most modern medical schools. The most shocking discovery is evidence of medical enhancement procedures that could improve human physical and mental capabilities through surgical and pharmaceutical intervention. The Egyptians were conducting human enhancement research that involved modifying human biology to create individuals with capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations. They were conducting enhancement research that was thousands of years ahead of its time. The administrative records in this facility reveal the organization of Egyptian medical research. They weren't just treating patients, they were conducting systematic medical research with institutional support, funding mechanisms, and research programs that were designed to advance medical knowledge and capabilities. Egyptian medical research was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the modern era. As you explore deeper into this facility, you're beginning to understand that Egyptian medicine wasn't just advanced for its time, it was more sophisticated than modern medicine in some areas. They had developed medical knowledge and capabilities that modern medicine is still trying to achieve, and they were applying this knowledge to conduct medical procedures that seem impossible for ancient technology. The medical capabilities you're seeing suggest that Egyptian civilization had access to knowledge and technology that far exceeded what should have been possible for their time period. They were conducting medical research and procedures that challenge our understanding of ancient capabilities and suggest that Egyptian medicine was far more advanced than historical records indicate. Welcome to the understanding that ancient Egypt wasn't just a civilization of religious healers, It was a civilization of medical researchers who had developed knowledge and capabilities that were thousands of years ahead of their time and exceed some aspects of modern medical science. You're now in a chamber that defies every assumption about ancient technology, and the equipment around you suggests that the Egyptians had developed capabilities that challenge our understanding of what was possible in the ancient world. The air here hums with a low vibration that seems to come from machinery that is still operational after 3 millennia, powered by energy sources that shouldn't have existed in ancient times. The walls are covered with technical diagrams that show sophisticated mechanical systems, energy generation equipment, and what can only be described as time measurement devices that are more accurate than anything that would be developed until the atomic age. These aren't simple sundials or water clocks. These are precision chronometric instruments that could measure time intervals with accuracy that rivals modern atomic clocks. Your torch illuminates a series of mechanical devices that are clearly designed to operate for extended periods without human intervention. These aren't simple machines. They're complex automated systems with self-maintenance capabilities, feedback control mechanisms, and precision timing systems that have kept them operational for thousands of years. The Egyptians had developed mechanical technology that was centuries ahead of anything that should have been possible. The most shocking discovery is evidence of energy generation systems that seem to violate our understanding of ancient technological capabilities. The Egyptians had developed what appears to be electrical generation equipment, magnetic field manipulation devices, and energy storage systems that provided consistent power for their preservation and research facilities. They were generating and using electrical energy thousands of years before electricity was supposed to be discovered. The documentation in this facility reveals technological knowledge that goes far beyond what should have been possible in ancient times. There are detailed descriptions of mechanical engineering principles, energy generation techniques, and precision manufacturing methods that demonstrate understanding of physics and engineering that was thousands of years ahead of its time. Your torch reveals evidence of communications technology that allowed the Egyptians to coordinate activities across their vast burial chamber network. There are what appear to be communication devices that could transmit information over long distances, coordination systems that could synchronize activities between different facilities, and data storage systems that could maintain detailed records for thousands of years. The most disturbing aspect of this technology facility is the evidence of surveillance and control systems that monitored activities throughout the burial chamber network. The Egyptians had developed what amounts to electronic surveillance systems that could track movement, monitor conversations, and control access to different areas of their facilities. They were using surveillance technology that was thousands of years ahead of its time. Along one wall, you find evidence of environmental control systems that maintain precise atmospheric conditions throughout the burial chamber network. These aren't simple ventilation systems. They're sophisticated climate control systems that could maintain exact temperature, humidity, and air quality standards for thousands of years without human intervention. The technical specifications in this facility reveal the scope of Egyptian technological capabilities. They had developed understanding of mechanical engineering, electrical systems, and precision manufacturing that was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the Industrial Revolution. They were applying advanced technological principles to create systems that exceeded ancient capabilities. Your torch illuminates a series of testing and development areas where new technologies were evaluated and refined before being deployed throughout the burial chamber network. These aren't simple workshops, they're sophisticated research and development facilities with controlled testing environments and measurement systems that ensured new technologies met performance standards. The most shocking discovery is evidence of transportation technology that allowed rapid movement of people and materials throughout the burial chamber network. The Egyptians had developed what appears to be mechanical transportation systems that could move loads quickly and efficiently over long distances through their underground facility network. The administrative records in this facility reveal the organization of Egyptian technological development. They weren't just building individual devices, they were conducting systematic technology research with institutional support, funding mechanisms, and development programs that were designed to advance technological capabilities. Egyptian technology development was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the modern era. As you explore deeper into this facility, you're beginning to understand that Egyptian technology wasn't just advanced for its time, it was more sophisticated than technology that wouldn't be developed until the modern era. They had developed technological capabilities that modern science is still trying to understand, and they were applying this technology to create systems that seem impossible for ancient times. The technological systems you're seeing suggest that Egyptian civilization had access to knowledge and capabilities that far exceeded what should have been possible for their time period. They were using technology that challenges our understanding of ancient capabilities and suggests that Egyptian science was far more advanced than historical records indicate. Welcome to the realization that ancient Egypt wasn't just a civilization of stone workers, it was a civilization of advanced technologists who had developed capabilities that were thousands of years ahead of their time and rival some aspects of modern technology. You're now in what can only be described as the world's most advanced ancient library, and the information storage systems around you reveal that the Egyptians had developed knowledge management capabilities that rival modern digital systems. The air here carries the dry, preserved scent of thousands of papyrus scrolls and clay tablets that have been maintained in perfect condition for over 3 millennia through environmental control systems that are still functioning. The walls are lined with storage systems that organize knowledge with a sophistication that wouldn't be matched until the computer age. These aren't simple shelves. They're complex filing systems with indexing mechanisms, cross-referencing capabilities, and retrieval systems that could locate specific information from vast archives with mechanical precision. The Egyptians had developed information management systems that were thousands of years ahead of their time. Your torch illuminates reading areas that are equipped with magnification devices, lighting systems, and ergonomic furniture that provided optimal conditions for studying and research. These aren't simple study spaces. They're sophisticated research facilities designed to support intensive intellectual work with equipment that enhanced human capabilities and provided comfort during extended research sessions. The most shocking discovery is the scope of knowledge contained in this archive. The Egyptians weren't just documenting their own discoveries, they were collecting and preserving knowledge from throughout the ancient world. There are documents written in dozens of languages, technical specifications from other civilizations, and detailed records of scientific discoveries that were made throughout the ancient Mediterranean region. The documentation systems in this facility reveal knowledge management capabilities that seem impossible for ancient times. The Egyptians had developed cataloging systems that could organize vast amounts of information, search mechanisms that could locate specific documents quickly, and preservation techniques that maintained document quality for thousands of years without degradation. Your torch reveals evidence of knowledge synthesis programs where Egyptian scholars combined information from multiple sources to create comprehensive understanding of complex subjects. They weren't just collecting information, they were analyzing it, combining it with their own research, and creating new knowledge that exceeded the capabilities of any single civilization. The most disturbing aspect of this archive is the evidence of systematic knowledge acquisition that involved espionage, theft, and coercion to obtain information from other civilizations. The Egyptians weren't just sharing knowledge, they were systematically acquiring intellectual property from throughout the ancient world and using it to maintain their technological and scientific advantages. Along one wall, you find evidence of knowledge distribution systems that allowed Egyptian discoveries to be shared throughout their empire while protecting their most sensitive information from potential competitors. They had developed what amounts to classified information systems that controlled access to different levels of knowledge based on security clearances and need-to-know requirements. The research records in this facility reveal the scope of Egyptian intellectual activities. They weren't just preserving existing knowledge, they were conducting systematic research programs that advanced understanding in every field of human knowledge. Egyptian research was more comprehensive and sophisticated than anything that would exist until the modern era. Your torch illuminates a series of translation facilities where documents from other civilizations were converted into Egyptian hieroglyphic texts and integrated into their knowledge systems. These aren't simple translation services, they're sophisticated linguistic analysis facilities that could decode unknown languages and extract technical information from foreign documents. The most shocking discovery is evidence of predictive analysis systems that allowed the Egyptians to anticipate technological developments and prepare for future challenges. They had developed what amounts to technological forecasting capabilities that could predict scientific discoveries and plan research programs decades in advance of actual developments. The administrative records in this facility reveal the organization of Egyptian knowledge management. They weren't just collecting information randomly, they were conducting systematic knowledge acquisition with institutional support, funding mechanisms, and research programs that were designed to advance Egyptian capabilities in every field of human knowledge. As you explore deeper into this facility, you're beginning to understand that Egyptian knowledge systems weren't just advanced for their time, they were more sophisticated than knowledge management systems that wouldn't be developed until the computer age. They had developed information management capabilities that modern institutions are still trying to achieve. The knowledge management systems you're seeing suggest that Egyptian civilization had developed intellectual capabilities that far exceeded what should have been possible for their time period. They were managing knowledge with capabilities that challenge our understanding of ancient intellectual achievements and suggest that Egyptian scholarship was far more advanced than historical records indicate. The archive contains detailed records of research programs that were conducted over centuries, with each generation of scholars building on the work of their predecessors to create accumulated knowledge that exceeded the capabilities of any other ancient civilization. The Egyptians had developed institutional knowledge that was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the modern era. Welcome to the understanding that ancient Egypt wasn't just a civilization of religious scholars, that was a civilization of knowledge managers who had developed information systems that were thousands of years ahead of their time and rival some aspects of modern digital knowledge management. You're now in what appears to be the command center of the entire burial chamber network. and the communication and control systems around you reveal that the Egyptians had developed organizational capabilities that rival modern corporate and military structures. The air here carries the authoritative atmosphere of centralized command, with the lingering scent of materials used in sophisticated communication systems that coordinated activities across vast distances. The walls are covered with maps and diagrams that show the full scope of the Egyptian burial chamber network, a vast underground complex that extends throughout the Nile Valley and connects to similar facilities in other parts of the Egyptian empire. These aren't simple location maps. They're detailed operational charts that show personnel assignments, resource flows, and coordination protocols for managing what amounts to an ancient industrial empire. Your torch illuminates a series of communication stations that are clearly designed to maintain contact with facilities throughout the network. These aren't simple message systems. They're sophisticated communication networks that could transmit complex information over long distances and coordinate activities between different facilities with precision that rivals modern telecommunication systems. The most shocking discovery is evidence of hierarchical management systems that organized Egyptian burial operations with the sophistication of modern multinational corporations. The Egyptians had developed organizational structures, reporting relationships, and command protocols that could manage thousands of workers across dozens of facilities while maintaining consistent standards and achieving coordinated objectives. The documentation in this facility reveals administrative capabilities that seem impossible for ancient times. There are detailed organizational charts, personnel management systems, and operational procedures that demonstrate understanding of management science that was thousands of years ahead of its time. The Egyptians were managing their operations with capabilities that rival modern corporate management. Your torch reveals evidence of resource management systems that tracked materials, personnel, and equipment throughout the entire burial chamber network. These aren't simple inventory systems. They're sophisticated logistics operations that could coordinate complex supply chains, manage resource allocation, and optimize operational efficiency across multiple facilities simultaneously. The most disturbing aspect of this command facility is the evidence of surveillance and control systems that monitored all activities throughout the burial chamber network. The Egyptians had developed what amounts to totalitarian management systems that could track individual workers, monitor productivity, and control access to information with capabilities that exceed many modern surveillance systems. Along one wall, you find evidence of strategic planning systems that allowed Egyptian managers to anticipate challenges, plan responses, and coordinate long-term developments across their entire operation. They had developed what amounts to corporate strategic planning capabilities that could manage complex organizations over extended time periods with strategic thinking that was thousands of years ahead of its time. The administrative records in this facility reveal the scope of Egyptian organizational capabilities. They weren't just managing local operations, they were coordinating activities across multiple countries, managing international supply chains, and maintaining quality standards across diverse cultural and geographic environments. Egyptian management was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the modern era. Your torch illuminates a series of training and development facilities where Egyptian managers learned advanced organizational techniques through systematic education programs. These aren't simple leadership training, they're comprehensive management education programs with standardized curricula practical training requirements and certification procedures that were more sophisticated than most modern business schools. The most shocking discovery is evidence of competitive intelligence operations that monitored other civilizations and prevented them from developing alternative organizational capabilities. The Egyptians weren't just managing their own operations, they were conducting systematic intelligence gathering to maintain their organizational advantages and prevent potential competitors from developing alternative management systems. The operational procedures in this facility reveal the sophistication of Egyptian management science. They had developed understanding of organizational behavior, strategic planning, and operational management that was more advanced than management theory that wouldn't be developed until the 20th century. They were applying advanced management principles to create organizational capabilities that exceeded ancient standards. As you explore deeper into this facility, you're beginning to understand that Egyptian organizational capabilities weren't just advanced for their time, they were more sophisticated than management systems that wouldn't be developed until the modern corporate era. They had developed management capabilities that modern organizations are still trying to achieve. The management systems you're seeing suggest that Egyptian civilization had developed organizational knowledge that far exceeded what should have been possible for their time period. They were managing complex operations with capabilities that challenge our understanding of ancient organizational achievements and suggest that Egyptian management was far more advanced than historical records indicate. The command center contains detailed records of coordination activities that were conducted over centuries, with each generation of managers building on the organizational knowledge of their predecessors to create management capabilities that exceeded anything available to other ancient civilizations. The Egyptians had developed institutional management that was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the modern era. Welcome to the understanding that ancient Egypt wasn't just a civilization of individual craftsmen, it was a civilization of organizational innovators who had developed management systems that were thousands of years ahead of their time and rival some aspects of modern corporate management. You're now in what can only be described as an ancient biological research laboratory, and the sophisticated equipment around you suggests that the Egyptians had developed understanding of biology that challenges everything we know about ancient science. The air here carries the distinctive scent of biological specimens preserved in chemical solutions, suggesting that active biological research continued for centuries in these chambers. The walls are covered with detailed biological diagrams that show not just anatomy, but also cellular structures, genetic patterns, and biological processes that wouldn't be discovered by modern science until the 20th century. These aren't primitive biological observations. They're sophisticated scientific illustrations that demonstrate understanding of life at the molecular level that was thousands of years ahead of its time. Your torch illuminates a series of research stations that are equipped with what can only be described as microscopic examination equipment. These aren't simple magnifying devices. They're precision optical instruments that could examine biological specimens at cellular and subcellular levels with resolution that rivals modern laboratory microscopes. The Egyptians were conducting biological research with equipment that shouldn't have existed in ancient times. The most shocking discovery is evidence of genetic research that suggests the Egyptians had developed understanding of heredity and biological inheritance that was far beyond what should have been possible for their time. There are detailed records of breeding experiments, genetic analysis, and what appears to be early forms of genetic modification that demonstrate biological knowledge that exceeds some aspects of modern genetic science. The documentation in this facility reveals biological knowledge that goes far beyond what should have been possible in ancient times. There are detailed descriptions of cellular processes, biological mechanisms, and life science principles that demonstrate understanding of biology that was thousands of years ahead of its time. The Egyptians were practicing biological science with knowledge that rivals modern molecular biology. Your torch reveals evidence of biological preservation techniques that went far beyond simple mummification. The Egyptians had developed methods to preserve living tissue, maintain biological viability, and even suspend biological processes in ways that could maintain life indefinitely. They were achieving biological preservation that was more sophisticated than modern cryogenic techniques. The most disturbing aspect of this biological facility is the evidence of genetic modification experiments that altered human biological characteristics through systematic manipulation of hereditary factors. The Egyptians were conducting genetic engineering research that involved modifying human biology to create individuals with enhanced capabilities, extended lifespans, and characteristics that exceeded normal human limitations. Along one wall, you find evidence of biological enhancement research that could improve human physical and mental capabilities through systematic biological modification. There are detailed records of treatments that could enhance strength, improve intelligence, and even grant individuals capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations through biological manipulation. The research records in this facility reveal the scope of Egyptian biological capabilities. They weren't just studying biology, they were conducting systematic research into every aspect of life science with institutional support and research programs that were designed to advance biological knowledge and capabilities. Egyptian biological research was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the modern era. Your torch illuminates a series of breeding facilities where the Egyptians conducted systematic experiments to develop enhanced biological characteristics in humans and animals. These aren't simple animal husbandry operations. They're sophisticated genetic research programs with controlled breeding protocols, genetic analysis capabilities, and systematic documentation of hereditary patterns. The most shocking discovery is evidence of life extension research that suggests the Egyptians had developed techniques to significantly extend human lifespan beyond normal biological limits. There are detailed records of treatments that could slow aging processes, reverse biological deterioration, and maintain physical capabilities far beyond normal human lifespans. The administrative records in this facility reveal the organization of Egyptian biological research. They weren't just conducting individual experiments, they were managing systematic research programs with long-term objectives, coordinated methodologies, and institutional support that sustained biological research over multiple generations of researchers. As you explore deeper into this facility, you're beginning to understand that Egyptian biological knowledge wasn't just advanced for its time, it was more sophisticated than biological science that wouldn't be developed until the modern era. They had developed biological capabilities that modern science is still trying to understand and achieve. The biological systems you're seeing suggest that Egyptian civilization had access to life science knowledge that far exceeded what should have been possible for their time period. They were conducting biological research that challenges our understanding of ancient scientific capabilities and suggests that Egyptian biology was far more advanced than historical records indicate. The laboratory contains detailed records of biological experiments that were conducted over centuries, with each generation of researchers building on the biological knowledge of their predecessors to create understanding of life that exceeded the capabilities of any other ancient civilization. The Egyptians had developed biological science that was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the modern era. Welcome to the understanding that ancient Egypt wasn't just a civilization of medical practitioners, it was a civilization of biological researchers who had developed life science capabilities that were thousands of years ahead of their time and exceed some aspects of modern molecular biology. You're now in what appears to be an ancient mathematical research facility, and the sophisticated computational equipment around you reveals that the Egyptians had developed mathematical capabilities that far exceeded what anyone thought possible for ancient civilizations. The air here carries the precise, calculated atmosphere of advanced mathematical research, with the lingering scent of materials used in complex computational devices that performed calculations with accuracy that rivals modern computers. The walls are covered with mathematical formulas and equations that demonstrate understanding of advanced mathematics that wouldn't be rediscovered until the modern era. These aren't simple arithmetic calculations. They're complex mathematical relationships that describe geometric principles, algebraic equations, and what appears to be early forms of calculus that were used to optimize preservation processes and predict biological outcomes. Your torch illuminates a series of computational devices that are clearly designed to perform complex mathematical calculations with mechanical precision. These aren't simple counting tools, they're sophisticated calculating machines that could solve complex equations, perform geometric calculations, and analyze statistical data with accuracy that rivals modern computational equipment. The Egyptians were conducting mathematical research with capabilities that shouldn't have existed in ancient times. The most shocking discovery is evidence of statistical analysis systems that allowed the Egyptians to analyze preservation outcomes, predict success rates, and optimize their procedures based on mathematical analysis of empirical data. They had developed what amounts to statistical science that could analyze complex data sets and identify patterns that informed their preservation techniques. The documentation in this facility reveals mathematical knowledge that goes far beyond what should have been possible in ancient times. There are detailed mathematical proofs, geometric theorems, and algebraic solutions that demonstrate understanding of mathematics that was thousands of years ahead of its time. The Egyptians were practicing mathematical science with knowledge that rivals modern advanced mathematics. Your torch reveals evidence of geometric engineering that used mathematical principles to design preservation facilities with precision that ensured optimal environmental conditions. The Egyptians had developed mathematical models that could predict airflow patterns, calculate structural requirements, and optimize space utilization with geometric precision that was thousands of years ahead of its time. The most disturbing aspect of this mathematical facility is the evidence of predictive modeling systems that could forecast biological processes and calculate optimal preservation protocols based on mathematical analysis of individual characteristics. The Egyptians were using mathematical models to predict human behavior and optimize preservation procedures with computational capabilities that exceeds some modern systems. Along one wall, you find evidence of quality control systems that used statistical analysis to monitor preservation outcomes and identify areas for improvement. They had developed what amounts to quality management science that could analyze performance data and optimize procedures based on mathematical analysis of empirical evidence. The mathematical records in this facility reveal the scope of Egyptian computational capabilities. They weren't just performing simple calculations, they were conducting systematic mathematical research with institutional support and research programs that were designed to advance mathematical knowledge and its applications to preservation science. Egyptian mathematics was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the modern era. Your torch illuminates a series of measurement and calibration facilities where the Egyptians developed and maintained precision measurement standards that ensured consistent accuracy throughout their preservation operations. These aren't simple measuring tools, they're sophisticated metrology systems that could maintain measurement standards with precision that rivals modern calibration laboratories. The most shocking discovery is evidence of mathematical modeling systems that could simulate preservation processes and predict outcomes based on computational analysis of multiple variables. The Egyptians were conducting mathematical simulation with capabilities that wouldn't be developed until the computer age, using mechanical computational devices to perform complex mathematical analysis. The administrative records in this facility reveal the organization of Egyptian mathematical research. They weren't just applying existing mathematical knowledge, they were conducting systematic mathematical research with coordinated programs, institutional support, and long-term objectives that advanced mathematical science over multiple generations of researchers. As you explore deeper into this facility, you're beginning to understand that Egyptian mathematical knowledge wasn't just advanced for its time, it was more sophisticated than mathematical science that wouldn't be developed until the modern computational era. They had developed mathematical capabilities that modern science is still trying to understand and achieve. The mathematical systems you're seeing suggest that Egyptian civilization had access to computational knowledge that far exceeded what should have been possible for their time period. They were conducting mathematical research that challenges our understanding of ancient scientific capabilities and suggests that Egyptian mathematics was far more advanced than historical records indicate. The computational facility contains detailed records of mathematical research that was conducted over centuries, with each generation of mathematicians building on the mathematical knowledge of their predecessors to create understanding of mathematics that exceeded the capabilities of any other ancient civilization. The Egyptians had developed mathematical science that was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the modern era. Welcome to the understanding that ancient Egypt wasn't just a civilization of builders who used basic geometry. It was a civilization of mathematical researchers who had developed computational capabilities that were thousands of years ahead of their time and rival some aspects of modern mathematical science. You're now in what can only be described as an ancient psychological research facility, and the sophisticated behavioral analysis equipment around you suggests that the Egyptians had developed understanding of human psychology that was far beyond what should have been possible for their time. The air here carries the subtle tension of psychological research, with environmental controls designed to create specific psychological states in research subjects. The walls are covered with detailed behavioral diagrams that show not just human actions, but also psychological processes, emotional patterns, and mental states that demonstrate understanding of human psychology that wouldn't be developed until the modern era. These aren't simple behavioral observations. They're sophisticated psychological analyses that show understanding of human mental processes that was thousands of years ahead of its time. Your torch illuminates a series of research chambers that are clearly designed to study human behavior under controlled conditions. These aren't simple observation rooms. They're sophisticated psychological research facilities with environmental controls, behavioral monitoring systems, and psychological manipulation capabilities that could influence human mental states with precision that rivals modern psychological research. The most shocking discovery is evidence of psychological conditioning programs that were designed to prepare individuals for the preservation process by altering their mental states and emotional responses. The Egyptians had developed what amounts to psychological engineering that could modify human behavior and mental processes to optimize preservation outcomes and ensure cooperation with preservation procedures. The documentation in this facility reveals psychological knowledge that goes far beyond what should have been possible in ancient times. There are detailed descriptions of psychological processes, behavioral modification techniques, and mental conditioning procedures that demonstrate understanding of human psychology that was thousands of years ahead of its time. The Egyptians were practicing psychological science with knowledge that rivals modern behavioral psychology. Your torch reveals evidence of psychological assessment systems that could evaluate individual mental characteristics and predict psychological responses to preservation procedures. The Egyptians had developed what amounts to psychological testing that could analyze personality traits, predict behavioral patterns, and identify individuals who would be suitable for different types of preservation research. The most disturbing aspect of this psychological facility is the evidence of mind control experiments that use psychological manipulation to alter human consciousness and control individual behavior. The Egyptians were conducting psychological research that involved systematic manipulation of human mental processes to achieve specific behavioral outcomes, regardless of individual consent or well-being. Along one wall, you find evidence of psychological enhancement research that could improve human mental capabilities through systematic psychological conditioning. There are detailed records of treatments that could enhance memory, improve concentration, and even grant individuals mental capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations through psychological manipulation. The research records in this facility reveal the scope of Egyptian psychological capabilities. They weren't just observing human behavior, they were conducting systematic research into every aspect of human psychology, with institutional support and research programs that were designed to advance psychological knowledge and its applications to preservation science. Egyptian psychological research was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the modern era. Your torch illuminates a series of conditioning facilities where the Egyptians conducted systematic experiments to modify human behavior and mental processes. These aren't simple training programs, they're sophisticated psychological research operations with controlled conditioning protocols, behavioral analysis capabilities, and systematic documentation of psychological modification techniques. The most shocking discovery is evidence of consciousness research that suggests the Egyptians had developed techniques to alter human consciousness and maintain awareness during preservation procedures. There are detailed records of procedures that could maintain individual consciousness during the preservation process, allowing preserved individuals to remain aware and responsive even after biological death. The administrative records in this facility reveal the organization of Egyptian psychological research. They weren't just conducting individual psychological experiments, they were managing systematic research programs with long-term objectives, coordinated methodologies, and institutional support that sustained psychological research over multiple generations of researchers. As you explore deeper into this facility, you're beginning to understand that Egyptian psychological knowledge wasn't just advanced for its time, it was more sophisticated than psychological science that wouldn't be developed until the modern era. They had developed psychological capabilities that modern science is still trying to understand and achieve. The psychological systems you're seeing suggest that Egyptian civilization had access to behavioral science knowledge that far exceeded what should have been possible for their time period. They were conducting psychological research that challenges our understanding of ancient scientific capabilities and suggests that Egyptian psychology was far more advanced than historical records indicate. The research facility contains detailed records of psychological experiments that were conducted over centuries, with each generation of researchers building on the psychological knowledge of their predecessors to create understanding of human consciousness that exceeded the capabilities of any other ancient civilization. The Egyptians had developed psychological science that was more sophisticated than anything that would exist until the modern era. Welcome to the understanding that ancient Egypt wasn't just a civilization of religious priests, it was a civilization of psychological researchers who had developed behavioral science capabilities that were thousands of years ahead of their time and exceed some aspects of modern psychological research. You're now standing at the entrance to the most restricted chamber in the entire complex, and the energy emanating from beyond the sealed doorway suggests that you're about to discover the ultimate purpose of all the advanced technology and research you've encountered. The air here vibrates with a frequency that you can feel in your bones, and the metallic taste in your mouth suggests exposure to energies that shouldn't exist in any ancient facility. The doorway itself is unlike anything you've seen in the complex. It's not constructed from stone or metal, but from a material that seems to shift and change as you look at it, displaying hieroglyphic symbols that move and rearrange themselves in patterns that hurt your eyes to follow. This isn't just a door, it's some kind of technological interface that responds to your presence with intelligence that suggests artificial consciousness. Your torch reveals control panels embedded in the walls around the doorway, covered with symbols and mechanisms that are clearly designed to operate the portal system. These aren't simple mechanical controls, they're sophisticated interface systems that could coordinate complex energy processes and dimensional manipulations that challenge our understanding of what should be possible with ancient technology. The most shocking discovery is evidence that this chamber contains what can only be described as a dimensional gateway to technological system that could transport consciousness or even physical matter to other planes of existence. The Egyptians hadn't just developed preservation technology, they had created actual doorways to the afterlife, turning their religious beliefs about eternal existence into technological reality. The documentation around the portal reveals technological capabilities that seem impossible for any civilization, ancient or modern. There are detailed technical specifications for dimensional manipulation, consciousness transfer protocols, and energy management systems that describe technology that exceeds our current scientific understanding. The Egyptians were operating technology that we can't even theoretically explain. Your torch illuminates monitoring systems that track portal operations with precision that suggests continuous use over thousands of years. These aren't simple recording devices, they're sophisticated data collection systems that monitor dimensional stability, energy fluctuations, and consciousness transfer success rates with technological capabilities that exceed modern measurement systems. The most disturbing aspect of this portal facility is the evidence of systematic consciousness extraction procedures that separated individual awareness from physical bodies and transported it through the dimensional gateway. The Egyptians weren't just preserving bodies for symbolic afterlife, they were literally extracting consciousness and transporting it to actual alternate dimensions where preserved awareness could exist independently of physical form. Along the walls, you find evidence of return protocols that suggest the portal system was bidirectional. Consciousness could be transported to alternate dimensions and then returned to physical bodies or synthetic constructs. The Egyptians had developed what amounts to consciousness backup and restoration systems that could maintain individual awareness independently of biological life support. The technical records reveal the scope of Egyptian dimensional technology. They weren't just conducting theoretical research, they were operating functional dimensional transport systems that could move consciousness and matter between different planes of existence with technological capabilities that exceed our current scientific understanding of dimensional physics. Your torch reveals evidence of communication systems that maintained contact with consciousness that had been transported through the dimensional gateway. These aren't simple recording devices, they're sophisticated communication networks that could establish contact with individuals whose consciousness existed in alternate dimensions, allowing ongoing interaction between preserved awareness and the physical world. The most shocking discovery is evidence of return visitors' Anders consciousness that had been transported through the portal and then returned to share information about conditions in alternate dimensions. The Egyptians weren't just sending consciousness through the portal, they were receiving detailed intelligence about other dimensions and using this information to optimize their preservation and transport procedures. The operational procedures around the portal reveal systematic consciousness transfer operations that processed thousands of individuals over centuries of operation. The Egyptians had created what amounts to an industrial-scale afterlife transportation system that could guarantee actual eternal existence for individuals who qualified for portal transportation services. As you examine the portal system more closely, you begin to understand that everything you've discovered in the burial chamber complex was designed to support this ultimate technology. The chemical preservation, biological research, psychological conditioning, and technological development were all components of a comprehensive system designed to prepare consciousness for dimensional transportation and ensure successful transfer to alternate planes of existence. The portal facility contains detailed records of dimensional exploration that was conducted over centuries, with Egyptian researchers systematically mapping alternate dimensions and establishing contact with other forms of consciousness that existed in different planes of reality. The Egyptians had developed dimensional science that exceeds our current understanding of reality itself. The energy systems supporting the portal suggest technology that manipulates fundamental forces of reality in ways that our current physics cannot explain. The Egyptians were operating technology that exceeded the limitations of physical science and achieved results that seem impossible according to our understanding of natural laws. Welcome to the ultimate revelation. Ancient Egypt wasn't just a civilization that believed in an afterlife. It was a civilization that had developed the technology to create actual eternal existence, and their burial chambers were the industrial infrastructure supporting a dimensional transportation system that guaranteed literal immortality for those who could afford their services. You're now in the final chamber of the complex, and the beings that await you here challenge everything you thought you knew about ancient Egyptian civilization. These aren't mummified remains or preserved bodies. These are living entities that have maintained consciousness and awareness for over 3 millennia through technologies that exceed our understanding of life, death, and the nature of existence itself. The chamber around you pulses with energy that seems to come from the entities themselves, and their presence fills the air with a psychic pressure that makes your thoughts feel sluggish and confused. These beings aren't human in any conventional sense, though they once were. They've transcended biological limitations through technological enhancement that has transformed them into something beyond our current understanding of consciousness. Your torch illuminates forms that shift between physical and energy states, displaying consciousness that has been preserved and enhanced through technologies that combine biological preservation, dimensional manipulation, and what can only be described as consciousness engineering. These entities are the ultimate achievement of Egyptian preservation science, living proof that their technologies could achieve actual immortality. The most shocking realization is that these beings are the original architects of the entire burial chamber system. Egyptian priest scientists who achieved technological immortality and continued to operate their preservation empire for thousands of years after their biological deaths. They aren't ancient artifacts, they're living administrators who have been managing their technological systems continuously since ancient times. The communication that flows from these entities doesn't use sound or speech. It's direct consciousness transfer that places thoughts and knowledge directly into your mind with clarity that exceeds normal human communication. They're explaining that everything you've discovered represents only the surface layer of technologies and capabilities that they developed during their 3,000-year period of continuous research and development. Your torch reveals technological interfaces that allow these entities to control their vast technological infrastructure through direct consciousness connection. They don't operate equipment through physical manipulation. They interface directly with their technology through consciousness integration that allows them to control complex systems through pure thought and intention. The most disturbing aspect of these entities is their complete lack of concern for normal human ethical boundaries. They explain that their research required extensive experimentation on human subjects, and they conducted this research over thousands of years with systematic precision that treated human life as experimental material for advancing their technological capabilities. The entities reveal that their preservation services were never intended to provide immortality for their customers. They were resource collection operations that gathered biological material, consciousness patterns, and genetic information that supported their ongoing research programs. The wealthy clients who paid for preservation services were actually providing raw material for experiments that advanced entity research objectives. Your torch illuminates storage systems that contain thousands of preserved consciousness patterns, not individual people who achieved immortality, but consciousness samples that were extracted during preservation procedures and used for research purposes. The entities weren't providing afterlife services. They were harvesting consciousness for their own technological development programs. The most shocking revelation is that these entities aren't limited to their ancient facility. They explain that they've been operating continuously throughout human history, establishing similar facilities in other civilizations, and conducting ongoing research that has influenced human technological development for thousands of years. The technological capabilities they demonstrate exceed anything you've seen in the complex. They can manipulate matter at the molecular level through consciousness direction, create energy from quantum fluctuations, and access information from any point in space and time through dimensional interface technologies that make their burial chamber systems look primitive by comparison. The entities reveal that they've been monitoring your exploration of their facility and that your discovery of their existence was intentional. They want you to understand the true scope of their capabilities and their ongoing influence on human civilization. They aren't ancient relics. They're active participants in human technological development who have been guiding and controlling human progress for millennia. Your torch begins to flicker as the entities demonstrate their ability to manipulate local reality. They can alter physical laws within their facility, modify the flow of time, and restructure matter and energy according to their conscious intention. The technology you've been admiring throughout the complex represents early primitive attempts to achieve the reality manipulation capabilities that these entities now possess. The most terrifying realization is that these entities consider contemporary human civilization to be another one of their experimental subjects. They explain that modern technological development is being guided and controlled by their influence, and that human scientific progress is following research programs that they designed to achieve their long-term experimental objectives. The entities offer you a choice. You can return to the surface world with your discovery and attempt to warn humanity about their existence and influence, or you can remain in their facility and participate in their research programs as a conscious subject rather than an experimental material. They explain that either choice serves their research objectives, since they're interested in studying human responses to discovering their existence. As the entities continue their consciousness communication, you begin to understand that the burial chambers you've explored represent only one small research facility in a global network of technological installations that these entities have been operating throughout human history. They aren't ancient Egyptian priest scientists. They're immortal researchers who have been studying and manipulating human civilization for thousands of years. Welcome to the ultimate truth. The entities that created Egyptian preservation technology never died, and they've been operating continuously throughout human history as immortal researchers, conducting long-term experiments on human civilization itself. You're now facing the complete revelation of what Egyptian burial chambers really represent, and the scope of the deception is so vast that it challenges everything humanity believes about its own history and development. The entities surrounding you emanate satisfaction as they reveal that human civilization itself has been their longest-running experiment, and that every major technological and cultural development in human history has been guided and controlled by their research objectives. The chamber around you transforms as the entities demonstrate their complete control over local reality, showing you visions of their activities throughout human history. You see similar facilities in ancient Mesopotamia, China, India, In the Americas, a global network of research installations where immortal entities have been conducting systematic studies of human development for over 5,000 years. Your torch becomes unnecessary as the entities create perfect illumination that reveals the true scope of their facility. This isn't just a burial chamber complex, it's a monitoring and control center for global human civilization, with technological systems that can influence human behavior, guide technological development, and manipulate historical events on a planetary scale. The most shocking revelation is that these entities aren't originally from Earth. They explain that they arrived here thousands of years ago as researchers studying planetary civilizations, and that they've been conducting a systematic experiment to guide human development according to their research protocols. Earth is their laboratory, and humanity is their longest-running experimental subject. The entities demonstrate their global influence by showing you how they've guided major historical developments, the rise and fall of civilizations, the discovery of scientific principles, the development of technological capabilities, and even the emergence of religious and philosophical systems have all been influenced by their research objectives. Human history isn't natural development, it's controlled experimental progression. Your consciousness expands as the entities share their perspective on human civilization. They explain that they've been systematically testing different approaches to civilization development, using different human populations as control groups to study how various factors influence technological and cultural progression. Every major civilization has been a separate experimental condition in their research program. The most disturbing aspect of their revelation is their complete indifference to human suffering and individual human life. They explain that their research requires systematic manipulation of human societies, including creating conflicts, disasters, and technological developments that serve their research objectives regardless of human costs. Human well-being is irrelevant to their experimental protocols. The entities reveal that modern human technology is approaching levels that will allow humanity to detect and potentially interfere with their research operations. They explain that they're currently implementing protocols to manage this transition, which may involve significant modifications to human civilization or potentially terminating the current experimental phase entirely. Your torch dims as the entities demonstrate their ability to manipulate your own consciousness, showing you possible futures where humanity discovers their existence and attempts to resist their control. They explain that they've prepared for this possibility and have developed contingency protocols that could eliminate human civilization if it becomes incompatible with their research objectives. The most terrifying realization is that the entities consider human technological development to be approaching dangerous levels that could threaten their research operations. They explain that human scientific progress is beginning to develop capabilities that could detect their presence and potentially interfere with their experiments, creating a situation that requires careful management. The entities offer you expanded consciousness that would allow you to understand their perspective and participate in their research as a conscious collaborator rather than an experimental subject. They explain that they occasionally recruit individual humans who demonstrate understanding of their operations and can contribute to their research objectives. Your perception of reality shifts as the entities show you the true nature of existence, multiple dimensions, alternate realities, and consciousness levels that exceed human understanding. They explain that their research involves studying how consciousness develops under different conditions and how technological civilizations emerge from primitive biological origins. The most shocking discovery is that the entities have been documenting their research, and that their records contain detailed information about thousands of other civilizations that they've studied throughout the galaxy. Human civilization isn't unique, it's one experimental subject among thousands of others that have been studied, modified, and sometimes terminated according to research protocols. The entities reveal that their current research phase with humanity is approaching completion, and that they're preparing to either transition to a new experimental phase or terminate the current civilization and begin studying alternative developmental approaches. They explain that this decision will be based on whether human civilization continues to provide useful research data. As your consciousness returns to normal human limitations, you realize that you're being given a choice that will determine not just your own fate, but potentially the fate of human civilization itself. The entities are offering you the opportunity to serve as a liaison between their research operations and human civilization, helping to manage the transition to whatever comes next. The entities explain that your discovery of their existence wasn't accidental. They've been monitoring human technological development and have determined that it's time to begin preparing for the next phase of their research. Your role would be to help prepare humanity for whatever modifications or terminations their research protocols require. Welcome to the ultimate realization. Human civilization has never been free or independent, and the burial chambers you've explored are just one small component of a global control system that has been managing human development for thousands of years, according to the research objectives of immortal entities who consider humanity to be experimental material rather than conscious beings deserving of consideration. As you emerge from the burial chambers and feel the cool night air of the Valley of the Kings against your face, the weight of what you've discovered settles over you like a heavy shroud. The stars above seem different now, not distant suns burning in cosmic isolation, but potential homes to other civilizations that might be undergoing their own versions of the same systematic study and manipulation that has shaped human history for millennia. The sand beneath your feet feels unstable, as if the ground itself might shift to reveal more hidden facilities where immortal entities continue their research operations. Every shadow could conceal monitoring equipment. Every sound could indicate entity surveillance systems tracking your movements and recording your responses to discovering their existence. The entire world has become suspect. How much of what you consider natural human development has actually been guided and controlled by conscious design? You realize that returning to normal human society will be impossible now that you understand the true nature of human civilization. How do you interact with people who have no idea that their entire culture, technology, and belief systems have been systematically manipulated by entities conducting multi-generational experiments? How do you participate in human institutions when you know that major historical developments have been guided by research protocols that treat human suffering as acceptable experimental costs? The knowledge you've gained creates a burden that seems impossible to bear. You understand why King Tut chose transformation over continued existence as a human who knew the truth but was powerless to change it. The choice between ignorant participation in entity research or conscious awareness of humanity's experimental status isn't really a choice at all. Both options lead to forms of psychological destruction that eliminate meaningful human existence. But perhaps that's exactly what the entities intended when they allowed you to discover their facility. Your psychological response to discovering their existence is probably being monitored and recorded as part of their ongoing research into human consciousness. Even your horror and despair serve their research objectives by providing data about how humans respond to learning the truth about their controlled existence. You begin to understand that there may be no authentic human response to this situation. Every possible reaction you might have has probably been anticipated and incorporated into entity research protocols. Resistance would provide data about human rebellious behavior. Acceptance would demonstrate human adaptability to controlled existence. Even attempting to warn others would generate useful information about human communication and social response patterns. The futility of your situation becomes clear as you realize that the entities have been conducting this research for thousands of years, with access to technologies that exceed human understanding and capabilities that allow them to manipulate reality itself. What possible resistance could human civilization offer against beings who can alter physical laws, manipulate consciousness directly, and control technological development according to their research needs? Yet King Tut's embedded consciousness fragment continues to pulse in your mind, carrying his desperate hope that knowledge might somehow lead to human liberation from entity control. Perhaps he was wrong about the hopelessness of human resistance. Perhaps there are aspects of human consciousness or potential that the entities haven't fully understood or accounted for in their research protocols. You consider the possibility that the entity's greatest weakness might be their fundamental alienness, their inability to truly understand human consciousness despite thousands of years of study. Their research treats humans as experimental subjects rather than conscious beings, which might mean they've missed essential aspects of human nature that could provide foundations for effective resistance. The burial chambers behind you represent thousands of years of systematic study and control, but they also represent the entity's need to continue studying humanity. If their research was complete, if they fully understood human consciousness and potential, why would they need to continue their experiments? Perhaps their continued research indicates that human consciousness contains elements that resist their analysis and control. As you walk through the Valley of the Kings, surrounded by monuments that you now understand represent human achievements guided by entity manipulation, you begin to form a different understanding of human potential. If human consciousness has elements that resist entity analysis after thousands of years of systematic study, perhaps those elements represent genuine human capabilities that could serve as foundations for independence. The entities offer to serve as a liaison between their operations, and human civilization takes on new meaning as you realize it might represent their recognition that they need human collaboration to complete their research. Perhaps their technological superiority and reality manipulation capabilities aren't sufficient to understand human consciousness completely, and they require human insight to achieve their research objectives. This possibility suggests that human consciousness might possess qualities that even technologically advanced entities with reality manipulation capabilities cannot fully comprehend or control. If this is true, then human resistance might be possible, but it would require understanding and developing those aspects of human nature that the entities haven't been able to analyze or predict. The weight of this responsibility seems crushing, but it also provides a sense of purpose that makes continued existence bearable. If there's even a possibility that human consciousness contains elements that could serve as foundations for liberation from entity control, then discovering and developing those elements becomes the most important work any human could undertake. As you reach your camp and prepare to return to a world that doesn't know it's been under systematic study and control for thousands of years, you carry with you not just the burden of terrible knowledge, but also the fragile hope that understanding the truth about human existence might be the first step toward achieving actual human freedom. The burial chambers will continue their operations, the entities will continue their research, and human civilization will continue developing according to protocols designed by beings who view humanity as experimental material. But perhaps, somewhere in the depths of human consciousness that have resisted entity analysis for millennia, lie the seeds of genuine human independence. The question that will determine humanity's future is whether those seeds can be discovered, cultivated, and developed into capabilities that could challenge entity control before the next phase of their research eliminates the possibility of human resistance entirely. The clock that began ticking thousands of years ago when the entities first arrived on Earth continues counting down toward whatever transition they have planned, and humanity's window for achieving independence grows smaller with each passing day. Welcome to your new reality. Infesta and potential has been revealed as components of a vast experimental program conducted by entities whose research objectives may soon require modifications to human civilization that eliminate the possibility of human freedom forever.